missile systems deployment. We have our resident analyst. Joining us tonight to dig deeper into the geopolitical impact of this new missile systems deployment, we have our resident analyst, supposedly our favorite, Richard Heydarian, joining us over to
our favorite.
Allegedly. Hi, Richard. Thanks for joining us on a Friday. Can you hear us okay?
Yes, I can hear you guys. Finally, nakaabutan tayo na hindi nasa tren or nasa bus or aeroplano. So it's good to finally catch up.
Okay, so you've heard what we were talking about, this new mid-range missile system called Typhoon. How big of a deal is this, and why is the deployment here in the Philippines along with the rest of the Indo-Pacific, why is it in the headlines?
Yeah, from my understanding, this weapon was developed just in 2022, and this is, I think, the first time it's going to be deployed outside the United States. So it's not only the first time in the Indo-Pacific, although we have to double-check that. So it's a huge thing in itself because this year's Balikatan is going to be even probably bigger than last year. And last year was already historic in itself with not only US and the Philippines, but also the British, not to mention Australians and Japanese also in attendance, and President Marcos Jr. also personally observing the Balikatan exercises. Now, speaking of these weapon systems, I mean, we saw also last year that the Americans, if I'm not mistaken, also used HIMARS. And some of the exercises that they did with the Philippine Army tried to simulate some of the things that NATO weapon systems have been doing in Ukraine against Russia. So for the past year or so, it looks like the Philippines is getting more and more comfortable with seeing high-tech, cutting-edge American military technology deployed here, perhaps also to send a signal and perhaps to also prepare the Philippines for potentially down the road to have interoperability with the Americans, including with the operation of these very, very advanced weapon systems. Now, honestly, I'm a little bit like medyo taas ang kilay ko in a sense that hindi lang dun sa Marites about the First Lady and the Vice President. I'm actually checking also the back and forth between the First Lady and potentially the Senator Amy Marcos. But for me, nataas ang kilay ko kasi why are we always taking China's sensitivities into consideration when the question is, has China been taking our sensitivities into consideration when it has been geoengineering on steroids in the South China Sea, when it has been threatening Taiwan right and left with potential invasion, when it has been deploying nuclear-capable submarines in the area, and who knows what else they have been doing in our waters. So I think as much as we should not be adjoint provocateurs, I think we also should not allow others. I mean, we should not give in to what I call the diplomatic Karen, right? Because this is what China does. They whine and they expect you to be sensitive to their sensitivities, but they're never reciprocating that, and their actions do not show that they are sensitive. Also, the considerations of countries like the Philippines. But I'm glad that at least both President Marcos Jr. and also senior officials like Mike Lohico are signaling a potential off-ramp. So Mike Lohico has said a while ago, as you correctly pointed out, that this is more for logistics and movement exercises rather than, practicing shooting China. And the other thing is President Marcos Jr. also the other day, I think in my opinion, correctly emphasized that we don't want to escalate the situation by giving Americans new basing access near the South China Sea or Taiwan and all. So I think the Philippines is striking a proper balance here whereby it's signaling to China that, hey, Americans can come here with the best weapon systems if possible, and we can be interoperable with them. But perhaps if you stop bullying us or stop threatening us, then perhaps we can recalibrate some of these things. So we're also signaling to China.
Okay.
I was wondering, it says here the Typhoon missile system covers the entire West Philippine Sea, Taiwan Strait, and several cities in China. I was wondering if this is an offensive threat to China or defensive in nature, or may pagkakaiba ba to dun sa tinatawag na David Sling ng Israel?
I mean, this is a kind of the mid-range weapon systems. You correctly pointed out how it's extremely flexible. It can be deployed from surface to air. It can be deployed potentially from different parts. It can actually have some southern provinces in China also within its range. But the Chinese have also been deploying weapon systems to the South China Sea, some of the fake islands they built there, that could potentially also put us within the range, right? The Chinese have also been developing this anti-access area denial capabilities, the asymmetric capabilities with Typhoon missile systems that could also put a lot of American assets in the area within the range. So for me, while we have to make sure that we're not unnecessarily threatening China, I think we also have to take into consideration that we have to also be in a position to defend ourselves. And if we are within the range of China and neither us nor our key allies are in a position to also put China within the range, then there's no balance of forces. So I think what we have to keep in mind is we have to have sufficient balance.
Okay, Richard?
Richard?
Richard, we lost your audio. Can you still hear us?
Yes, I can hear you guys.
Okay, we lost your audio, just the last sentence.
Yeah, what we need is a balance of forces here, right? Because China is developing the capabilities that puts us within the range of attack. So we also have to be open to the ability to also deploy weapon systems either through our allies or ourselves. That
So
could
it's
also put
basically
them within our range.
like a tit for tat, right? Like we have this, oh, but I also have this. Kind of, is that the optics that we want to give off?
Well, the tit for tat is more like what we're seeing in the Middle East right now. So no one is hitting each other right now, right? This is just missile defense systems, right? It's more like if you hit us, then we can hit you back. But thank God no one is in that position. And I think it's quite natural in a very tense situation right now for the Philippines to consider the possibility of either having the Americans deploy it or us having the basic capabilities to operate it down the road. But as I said, it's too early to talk about that because these are just drills. This is just America doing it for logistical purposes. But I think the signal to China is very, very important. We're essentially telling to China that, yes, you're the superpower in this region. Yes, you have fantastic weapon systems. Yes, we're smaller compared to you, but we also have cards to play. And this could be one of the cards, because one of the things that we have
But
not
Richard, wait, hold
clarified
that
yet
thought,
is
though. Is that
what
what-
kind of weapons...
Richard,
Yeah.
hold that thought. Is that what we are wanting to show to China, the message that we're sending to China? Or is that the message that the U.S. is sending to China? Because it could be also perceived as that, and we're just kind of like the conduit for that.
My concern with that line of argumentation is we are the one directly being bullied in the West Philippine Sea, and we will be targeted almost certainly if there's going to be an invasion of Taiwan, ipso facto, because we're a U.S. ally. So again, I completely understand that we should not be a pawn for any superpower. We should not be just a forward deployment base for Americans. I always say we should not be the Pearl Harbor of America in a potential new Cold War with China or worse. I agree with all of that. But the thing is, we are almost helpless here. We have nothing to match what China is doing in the South China Sea and potentially what China could do if they occupy Taiwan. So either through our allies or more directly, we have to signal to China that we also have some options and some cards to play. And as I said, remember, my argument always was it's about balance of forces, but also leverage. So indirectly, we can tell the Chinese that, okay, if you don't want us to allow the Americans to have more of these weapon systems deployed, if you don't want us to get HIMARS and other weapon systems from Americans, if you don't want us to give more access to Americans, who knows, potentially to Mavulis, if not Pagasa, of course, theoretically, then maybe you also have to do something good in return. So the thing is this, the diplomacy doesn't work with China or any country like that if you have no leverage. So in my opinion, while there's always a little risk and China is going to make noise, but this could give us a certain degree of leverage. And by the way, South Korea in the past also had a similar problem with China when they actually allowed THAAD missile systems to be deployed there in South Korea permanently in the US bases in South Korea, close to the borders of China. There was a lot of back and forth, but eventually South Korea got its way despite some diplomatic tensions. That's already South Korea. That's already next to China's borders. So I think as much as we have to be not agents provocateurs or pawns of America, we should also not be oversensitive to whining and Karen diplomacy, and at the same time think about proper balance of forces. We have very few cards to play, so it's always good to have an additional card up our sleeves.
All right, that's all the time we have for tonight. But thank you, as usual, for your insights and for your time tonight. It's a Friday, as I keep saying to all our guests.